All right, we are back. This is Nick with Broadband Heroes, and I have some high energy guests today. So I'm gonna use my radio voice because I also have a face for radio, even though we're on video. But guys, I'm super happy. Why don't you guys introduce each of yourselves? That's right, English, and then we'll jump into some fun questions. So just for context, though, we are at Mountain Connect here talking about broadband, talking about some fun stuff. So introductions first.
Sure.
Who are you?
I am Peter Voderberg. I am the chief of Broadband Ohio. We're a division inside the Ohio Department of Development dedicated to bringing high-speed internet access to every Ohioan, regardless of where they happen to live. And I say that so often, I do it in a single breath.
Wow. You should be one of the auctioneers.
I will not be doing this in a single breath. So I'm Drew Lovell. I'm the acting director for the Office of Broadband Access and Expansion, which is always a mouthful. We go by OBI instead of Obey, because especially in southern New Mexico, where the office is, we want to make sure that people aren't struggling with obeying government. And it's always one that we have to pay attention to. So yeah, so OBI.
Oh my. All right. Well, gentlemen, welcome. Why don't we actually first start, because it's interesting. I don't think you guys always go to all these conferences, but I've bumped in a couple of people. Everybody doesn't actually know what you guys do. No, they don't no, but I say that jokingly, but they're like, okay, yeah, there's a lot of these broadband offices. They get money. They get money and they do stuff with money. Maybe just let's dumb it down. Like, what do you guys do?
Yeah, I sometimes joke that I'm just a money bag with a monocle, right? Like I'm Mr. Monopoly, like running with cash out of his pocket, running down the street, trying to get broadband to everybody. But really what we are is, the Division of Broadband Ohio was created by the Broadband Houston administration to answer a need. At the beginning of the administration, we had a couple of internet service providers who wanted to get into our state assets, everything from our right-of-ways to our towers to, our water towers and things like that. And they had come forward and said, hey, we want to do this. And we, as a state, went, okay, well, then if you're going to do that, like, what are we going to get in return? Like, how can we work together so that we can expand broadband? And the negotiations didn't go very well. The internet service providers that we were talking to were very much like, no, we don't feel like giving you anything. You should just give us the assets for free. And so we did a quick pause. We had a huge study. The study said that we need a broadband strategy. And the other thing it said was you need a broadband office. And so we did a first strategy. The first strategy had a broadband office. And because I helped to write both the report and the strategy, I was told that it was my turn to go run something. So here I am as the state broadband chief.
So you got to write your own job description, basically.
I didn't mean to. It was not intentional. I'm going to be honest. Like that was not what I was doing on purpose. But then really what we do is, so prior to BEAD, prior to everything, I actually started at the beginning of March of 2021. So like I showed up to work and then a week later we all got sent home, right? Like that's to put into perspective, like as to what happened. And we went from being broadband, very important, high-speed internet, super important. It connects you to the world, to everyone realizing in a very short amount of time how accurate that statement was, right? So right away we were posting lists of everyone who at the time was accepting EBB, the emergency broadband benefit, right? So we put lists up. I was like, here are your providers that, you could qualify for EBB. We worked with all of our providers to find all of the public Wi-Fi hotspots, and we created a map and a list of all those places. I'd actually started our relationship with the Ohio Library Council because the director of the Library Council, who's a friend of mine, basically called me up and she's like, well, you put this map up, but libraries aren't on it. Why aren't they? And I was like, you're right. Why aren't they? And so I went ahead and turned around and we put all the libraries on it.
And for the record, since I grew up in Ohio, Ohio libraries are the best.
They're amazing.
They are the best.
It was a mistake of mine. And so we quickly fixed it. We did $50 million for student connectivity devices. We did a donation of devices to a nonprofit to refurbish. And then that kind of led into our existing grant program. So then, the legislature was very generous and worked with the administration, and we created a $250 million grant program. And then we just kind of were the ones that were already taking over some of these grants. We do everything from, our state grants. We do an accelerator program to help county commissioners create county plans. We do a whole bunch of stuff, right? So just to keep people informed of what we do. And that just kind of led into what we do now, which is oversee a lot of the implementation of the federal funds, both the Coronavirus Capital Projects Fund that goes to broadband, and then that was part of ARPA, or the American Rescue Plan Act, and then
We're in telecom. We like
Yeah.
acronyms,
we have
right?
acronyms, and then the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program. So, I mean, when you ask what we do, the answer is the number one thing we do is make sure that every step we take is getting someone broadband in the state of Ohio, right? So everything that we do, when we comment, when we put things up for comment, or when we talk to people, or when we produce plans, it's because we are dedicated to trying to make sure that every Ohioan has broadband. So that's our mission.
That's awesome.
Yeah, very similar, just slightly different backgrounds on this. But yeah, for New Mexico, the Office of Broadband really got started in the 2021 session. I think everyone kind of realized in the middle of that pandemic, right, that of course you do need internet, education, healthcare. New Mexico very much has, fifth largest state, 36 population, right? So we had a lot of families who were driving to the local McDonald's. I mean, it's a familiar story, but it's one that resonates. And so the office came about, started in 2022. We had our first director appointed then, and I came on as the second employee about 3 months later. And when our director retired, I stepped in to kind of fill the void. But much of what we do is all about getting out state dollars. We have a Connect New Mexico fund. It's broken out to $70 million infrastructure fund. We've got $25 million, for schools. And then we have a $5 million grant writing, engineering planning fund. So we actually just done a bunch of announcements for that GWEP program. We're about in the next week or so going to do some announcements for that $70 million. And then on top of that, all of a sudden came the bipartisan infrastructure law and BEAD. And so now we've got $675 million that was allocated. And so a lot of this is the grant writing, and the granting to be able to reduce barriers across New Mexico. But to your point about, doing other things in our statute, we have, all the mapping requirements in perpetuity, right? We have technical assistance in perpetuity. So we actually have, we've built our staff up to now 25 employees because we have 6 of them that do project management, technical assistance, and we have 1 employee for every program. We need to have some administrative needs, and then let me tell you about needing lawyers for rights of way. Oh my gosh, and every time there's a new legislative piece, we need a lawyer to be taking a look at that. So we really grown the office to meet the demands and meet our obligations of perpetuity. And so we have all those, and then we didn't even talk about digital equity, right? Which is going to be the dovetailing program to all of this, and making sure that people can actually use the internet effectively and efficiently. So, it very much, Peter's passion, comes through. Like, it's the same. We are all mission driven at the Office of Broadband to make sure that we can actually get the connections, then the usage, right?
Well, let me ask you
safety, right?
Let me ask you a question then on around accountability, right?
Sure.
When you're starting to deal with that much money, that much, and you guys, your energy is infectious. You're definitely purpose driven. With that much money and that much, honestly, on your shoulders to do, how do you ensure that there is accountability? How do you ensure accountability in your office? How do you ensure accountability in the people that are actually doing the work to bring connectivity to these communities?
Well, you have a lot of nightmares. I mean, by just worrying all the time. But I think what we do is, so during implementation, right? So we're implementing one of our state grants right now, right? And so during implementation, part of it is you just meet all the time, right? So at least once a month, if not more, we are sitting down with our providers who are building the infrastructure, being like, how far have you gotten? How many permits do you have? What roadblocks are you reaching? Like, what are some of your problem counties? What are things that you're struggling with? Because we're trying to get in front of it to make sure that we actually can get all the infrastructure deployed, because things are popping up. I mean, one of the things that I've talked about at length, both here at Mountain Connect and in other conferences and other places, is we don't have enough pole replacement people. Like, we don't have enough human beings to go out and do pole replacements. We had one company that had over 100,000 pole permits that were over 2 years old. Right. So that company had been waiting 2 years for over 100,000 permits. Now, the utility that we're talking about has done such a great job of really getting in front of it. We've been working with them to get them additional workforce and additional tools so that they could do something. But again, like, we didn't know that was coming. Right. So that's why frequently we meet so often with our industry sector partners to just talk them through, like, what do you need? What are you actually seeing? What's happening to you? And on top of that, we try to make sure that we stay in touch with the communities that they're affecting, to be like, are they there? Like, are they, do you see?
Have you seen a truck?
Have you seen a truck? Like, has Jimmy gotten out and, run fiber on a pole, right? Like, that's, that's why, that's how we try to maintain accountability, because, ultimately we have to make sure that not only did we give the money to build it, but that it's built and it will stay built for, the times to come. So
It's a lot of money to be put on the ground or on the pole, and
That's
then
right.
it collapse
Evaporates,
after,
I will say it's fun to talk about the money part of it, but then the accountability part is like the not so sexy.
That's
part of
right.
Broadband.
That's right.
Right. And I mean, really what it comes down to is exactly that, having the conversations, taking the reimbursement forms, double checking the invoices, coming in. And this is, why, we think that it takes a lot of staff to get this done, right? You actually have to have the accountability piece, and this project managers literally go out and do site visits and check, what the work has been happening. So that's been a really big part of, building the team, and then building the relationships with the ISPs and the awardees. And then, much like Peter said, we're out, we did, 9 different engagements for the challenge process for BEAD, all around the state of New Mexico, which is, a very large territory to get around.
Yeah.
So, making sure that we have those project managers in each of those communities is very important to hear from stakeholders as well as ISPs.
So are you guys, I mean, we're obviously talking technology, it's broadband. Are you pushing the people working on this to use more technology to drive transparency and accountability back to you?
So there's a couple of things that we've done around this. I think BEAD's going to be an interesting element. Government tends to run slowly and use older processes. I mean, a lot of the reimbursement stuff that we're talking about is paperwork. But as we move into BEAD, I mean, there's a lot of interesting ways to see, how houses are lit up. I think that's something that we're exploring for the future, and to simplify it, because, if there's an easier way to get it done and you can do the double checks, it's a great option. But
Yeah, if you click on, hey, oh yes, they did actually bury that cable.
I
Yeah.
will say, internally in the office, I've got a couple of very tech savvy, staff. I'm pretty interested in doing things like automating processes. So we've actually used a lot of like Power Automate tools in our Microsoft suite to be able to take forms and then, fill in spreadsheets for ourselves, and then, move that over into our database. So that's actually been something that we've been working on the back end. So yes, we like it. It doesn't always fit, the government system, but we try and find efficiencies where we can.
Yeah. And I think too, I mean, some of the things that we've run into is this tension, right? This tension between, how much am I actually going to ask an ISP to do to prove to me that they did what they said that they were going to do, without becoming so overbearing that the ISP is like, well, then I'm an internet service provider. I'm sorry, ISP is an internet service provider. Without them going,
If they're listening to this, they actually know that.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. Yeah. So, but without them turning around and saying like, well, then I don't want to do it, right? Because there's products out there right now where I could tell an internet service provider that they have to add a subroutine to their network operations center, and it will automatically validate and report back to me that the speeds are correct, that the network operations are the way that they said, right? But I don't know a lot of ISPs that want to have me give them a piece of code that goes into their system. You know what I mean? Like, and so we have this tension of like, well, what are we going to do to make sure that we have the information we need, while not necessarily going so overboard that our internet service providers just don't want to do it. So we actually we're finalizing right now a third-party validator contract, where they're going to go out. They're actually going to take subsections of awarded territories, and because I only have 5 people in my office, I do not have more than 20, right? So we are going to be sending them out, and they'll be doing everything from like going and doing site visits and making sure that they're going to compare like actual technology to as-built maps and be like, okay, yes, it's actually here, like it's where you said it was, or it's reasonably close to where you said it was, right? To perpetually do, in essence, what they did for like AECAM or things like that, right? Where they were like, oh, well, we're going to do speed tests and then give you information on those speed tests going forward, so then we can see that they're actually, providing the services necessary.
I'm curious from a community perspective. So there's obviously lots of people in the ecosystem, right? So you're working with the ISPs, you're working with utilities, you're working with all these people. How much does the community get involved at which stage, right? I mean, they've obviously reached out to you, or that there's a demand. So it's like it's Captain Obvious, right? Like you need this. At what point do you keep them informed, or do you want to keep them informed? Because a lot of people at the end of the day, I don't think, and I laugh about it when we come to these conferences, because most people, they don't give a damn about like how it works. They just don't. Like, they don't care all the bits and the bytes, and oh, is there a remote terminal there? Is this like they don't care? They just want it to work.
They just want their streaming.
They just want. I want to be able to turn on
Right.
YouTube or
Yeah.
Netflix.
I don't want
or-
to turn off my camera during Zoom. Like, why do I have to? You know, why am I
Exactly.
buffering? Like, that's the big thing that I get. So.
Yeah. So, you know, how often and, you know, how, I mean, that's actually been a big issue for us in New Mexico, right? So, you know,
Just spread out.
I get emails that say like, hey, I saw, you know, the $675 million, you know, was announced like last year, I guess, in June, right? And, you know, that there was all this money for broadband, you know, 2.5, 3 years ago, out of the bipartisan infrastructure law, right? And they're like, where is my internet? I know that there's fiber out there off that road.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, okay, like, you know, I need to do a better job communicating this information out because we've done all the tours around the state, we've done the stakeholders, we continue to do it in every program that we run, but it's still not getting out there. And so, you know, I think there's a big gap of if you do not have the internet, right? If you do not have high-speed internet, you're probably not getting the social media, you know, activities from the office. You're probably not getting the emails from us, right? Like those are like pretty obvious things, but in a lot of ways, like that's just how business is done. And so we've actually hired a PR person that's internal to our office. So not only does he do the press releases, but he's been actually putting us on the radio and going around the state, writing some op-eds, you know, for us, and also putting us on you know our local television stations.
It's government getting into sales and marketing, right?
Well, you know, I mean, you know, if you've ever worked private sector, right, you have a marketing team, you have you know someone who's controlling the brand, and you know this isn't the thing that government does normally that well. But
now you do.
But that communication piece is critical to those communities to make sure that they know what's happening because it takes a long time. I mean, that's the thing that I think is missed, right? Here's all this money. It takes a long time.
Yeah, and I think, you know, from our perspective, what we've really done is, so early on, I was a one-man show. Like, it was just me. Like, I was the broadband office. You know, I didn't have a budget. I didn't have any staff. I didn't have anything. And
they just called you the office.
I was
They didn't even
the
have.
office.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah, that's pretty much what it was. And so, what ends up happening is when my first assistant chief was hired, who was then recently promoted to chief himself because he's amazing, and I have a new assistant chief, and she's also amazing because I have a great staff. But when he first came on, the first thing I told him was I was like, look, we have no good way of getting all this information out to folks. Like, I don't have a good way to talk to people. And so we created very early on what we call the Broadband Ohio Alliance, because we're terrible at naming things. We just go, it's whatever the thing is, add a word. Like, that's what we do, right? So it's broadband, so it's Broadband Ohio, and that's an alliance, so it's Broadband Ohio Alliance, right? That's the naming convention that we use. And so what ends up happening is
BOA is better than DOA.
That's very true. So we go ahead, we go ahead and created a group, and it was very much an external facing group. And every time we went anywhere, anytime we talked to anybody, and we have a policy of meeting with everybody. So no matter who you are in the state, we will meet with you because we want to talk to you about your experience. And then every time we talk to somebody, we go, oh, we want you to be on the Broadband Ohio Alliance. And so it's usually one email a month, maybe once every 2 weeks, and then just about once a quarter. Although because of BEAD, we've been a little behind in this. We actually have a huge meeting where we actually go out to the communities, and we go typically in Columbus because it's centrally located, but we go out about and go like, here's where we are in the process. Like, here's the BEAD program, here's things. And frequently we also have, like, we have some counties that are very aggressive in going after projects. And so we'll be like, and here's a county commissioner who's now going to talk to you about their great project. And when we were doing our Digital Equity Act submission, when we submitted our digital opportunity plan, right? So we had actually done some pre-planning grants. So we actually took our planning dollars and did grants, and we had some really amazing results. And so one of our Broadband Ohio Alliance meetings was like, okay, here's all of everyone who ran a grant. We had like a speed panel where it was like, they each gave like a 5-minute presentation on the grant that they got, and then explained like how it impacted their community. And so
using FOMO.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And then the other thing we did was we split the state for digital equity purposes. We split the state into 5 regional digital inclusion alliance areas, and each of them have a lead organization that then does all of our digital opportunity work. So there's a southeast, northeast, southwest, northwest, and central region, and they all are dedicated to making sure that they're helping people with their capacity grant applications, and they're helping people with their, with the competitive applications. And so we do these things because there isn't a great way to get we can put it on Facebook. We have social media, but I'm going to be honest. So I work for the Department of Development. Like most of the people who follow the Department of Development, there's a lot of great people out there who do it, but not everyone's going to think to themselves, like, I should follow development so that I can know what's going on with broadband, right? So we try to take these other methods to really get out there. We've done listening sessions. We're willing to go anywhere. We were just on the phone with Ashtabula County, which is our most northeast Ohio county. And we talked to all the internet service providers about $50 million we have for pole replacements. So I talked to the County Commission Association. We talked to Municipal League. We take all the avenues we can to just get in front of people to say, this is what's going on, in the hopes that someone who hasn't heard it yet will then go like, oh, well, then I need to talk to them so that I can figure out like how we can make sure that all my constituents have service.
One of the cool thing in New Mexico that we have is our Connect New Mexico Council, which is basically an advisory council, and it's made up of experts from state government as well as from industry. And they actually have these working groups. So we have like a digital equity working group that is like a very consistent 28 very dedicated people working all around the state constantly. And so it's been really nice having that feedback mechanism. Once every other week I can go sit in one of these work groups. We have tribal working group. We have some rule making for the council, as well as a couple others. But having that feedback mechanism coming to you is also a really nice piece.
I was going to ask you, what can, outside of the ISP, how can the private sector actually help you? Because you have limited resources, limited budgets. How can the private industry, outside of just the ISPs, like where do you want help?
Sure. From our perspective, like the Regional Digital Inclusion Alliances, or RDIAs as we call them, because everything's an acronym. So our Regional Digital Inclusion Alliances, that is a place where a lot of our private sector folks can go to help, right? We've done everything from computer drives to digital literacy programs to just raising awareness about the different, nonprofits that are in the area that are working on this, so that our private sector non-industry folks have an outlet to be like, oh, I want to help either my staff, or I want to help the community. Like, what can I do? A lot of them go to the Regional Digital Inclusion Alliances and go like, how can I help? And then those folks who are helping be those lead agencies typically have like, well, let me put you in contact with these guys over here, or these folks over here. And so that's kind of what we've done.
Crowdsourcing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We've been making sure that, which is why we have the Regional Digital Inclusion Alliances in the first place, right? Because no one in Toledo knows who I am. Right? Like, yes, there's like a handful of like internet service providers and nonprofits who are like, if I walked in, they'd be like, it's Peter. But like the average person, the average company, the average CEO, small business owner, I don't care, is going to go, I don't know who this person is. But who they do know? They know Lucas, who's the person who runs our RDIA up in Toledo. And like, because he also works at the Lucas County Public. Yes, his name is Lucas, and he works at Lucas County Public, right? But he they know him, and so like when he walks in and goes like, "Hey, I want to talk to you," they're like, "Oh, well, you're part of our community. You're part of our neighborhood." Smart Columbus is that for our central region, Greater Cleveland Partnership, Buckeye Hills Regional Council, and then the Greater Cincinnati United Way. So they all already had contacts. They all know these people already. So when we task them with being like, "Hey, help us write these digital equity grants and applications and things like that," they have a network that they can already tap into that's just growing because they already have experience in trying to do these kind of community-driven efforts.
Awesome.
So, yeah, I think in New Mexico, the things that we need is a lot. We need partnerships, with ISPs looking around, funding for like these upcoming infrastructure projects. One of the key things I hear, consistently is like, hey, I just did, Reconnect. I just did RDOT. I just did the Connect New Mexico funds, and all of those require 25% matches or 20 or 30 or whatever, right? And they're like, we're tapped out. How do we build the rest of the infrastructure? So, that's kind of one element, out there, devices. I mean, the lack of devices, especially that don't have bloatware, and kind of that digital equity, digital opportunity space, is huge. We need to get more devices donated, from corporations that are just turning them over every 2 years, refurbished. out to the communities. It's great that we keep talking about infrastructure connectivity, and I spent most of Mountain Connecting already talking about the infrastructure piece, but this element, right? Yeah, this element of the connectivity is really critical. So, Peter brings up, some really great points about, getting that element out there. And so we're actually, I think, just about to finish a contract on a fire recovery. We had Rio Doso fires down in southern parts of New Mexico, and we're looking at standing up a digital equity, small contract where we have a nonprofit come in, have some donated devices to be able to hand out to these fire victims. So that's in the Mescalero Apache reservation and the adjacent Rio Doso. It's kind of the most southern ski resort in New Mexico at the town. So yeah, we're looking to try and get some devices, out there, and that way people can actually get reconnected.
That's awesome.
They've lost everything.
Yeah, and I think too, I mean, the other thing that we run into as well is like this idea of, okay, the other thing you can do is make sure that we have public Wi-Fi somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And I think so. We've had a lot of success in a lot of different projects where, we in the city of Dayton, we had 3 rec centers that had no Wi-Fi at all, which you would think like a rec center would have Wi-Fi, and they didn't. And we worked with a provider and brought Wi-Fi to the rec centers. It made a huge difference for the community because now they had some place that was within walking distance that they could get to, that they could go and get online if they wanted to. And plus it's a rec center. So a lot of people were going there anyway.
Yeah.
And now they could actually use the rec center to get online and to do things like that. We helped a small community, a small community outside of one of our school districts. We actually brought fiber to the entire community and then subsidized any student who was at the school so that they could have internet service there. And those things will eventually be things that we can't keep doing, right?
Right.
So those are the kinds of things, working with some of our providers and things like that, where it's like, oh, well, I can take over subsidizing, or I can be the one that might be willing to say like, oh, well, I'll make sure the kids have hotspots. I'll make sure the kids have, computers or whatever else. Because again, those are some of the things that private industry can do. That
a lot easier than you guys.
that easier than I can. Right? So, I mean, I think that's a big thing. So
I have one final question. I'm just curious, as a marketer myself, we're joking about the acronyms and all the issues, but I mean, it is something that, I wonder, as we move past the infrastructure piece, which is, I think we talk about all the time, to the digital equity and the engagement, does there need to be a concentrated effort to change the language, change how we actually talk about this stuff? Because the normal person, all these acronyms, the councils, the alliances, the this, the that, like, if you want to talk to people and get them, we need to be using plain English, in my opinion. I'm wondering, like, as you guys move past that infrastructure stage and you start getting into these programs, like, you almost have to shift, right? Like a little bit.
So let me just add that, New Mexico's constitution is in Spanish and English.
Oh,
right. And,
okay.
and especially in a lot of the rural communities, like my wife's, grandmother, Spanish was the only language she spoke, for almost 20, 30 years of her life. I mean, for New Mexico, it is a place where the border truly did cross, the people. And so that's kind of one element. But then we also have 23 tribes of Pueblos, and they all have their own, variations of about 6 or 7 different, languages that they speak. And so, not just plain English, right? We need to also be working on how to communicate with people in their native languages, right?
That's a great point.
And so, I think it kind of goes beyond, that element of how do we find trusted partners in those communities, right? To be that advocate and be that digital literacy coach, to be, able to be the bridge, right, to the technologies that are needed to be in the modern life. And, and I think the other piece that we really talk a lot about, especially with the tribal communities, is how do they preserve their culture, right?
Sure.
With, being bombarded with a lot of things coming in online, especially for their youth. So, I think there's a lot of elements we really have to think about, be thoughtful. And fortunately, there's a lot of great nonprofits and advocates already in New Mexico, and we're going to need more.
Yeah, and I think too, I mean, we've, just to give you a hint of acronyms, right? I could just say a sentence by starting going like, yeah, when ARPA passed the CPF, that was prior to the BIL or IIJA, which contains BEAD and DE. I mean, like, these are the kinds of things that we deal with all the time, right? Like, these are the kinds of acronyms that we deal with. And I can say this. So we actually created a Broadband 101 handbook, right? So like, you can actually go, and it's on our website, and I'll tell you a funny story about that in a second. But we have, we have a Broadband 101 handbook that you can go look at that is like, these are the breakdowns. When we go and speak, like, I actually have a slide dedicated to being like, this is a crash course in some of the words you're going to hear, and then a very simple diagram of like, what does it mean to be online, right? And like, where are the things in this picture
Yeah.
so that someone doesn't get lost when I start talking about like, well, middle mile and, you know, last mile and, you know, we're down and 20 up or any of the other crazy things I have to say. But I think it goes one step further though, because I think what we really run into a lot is that not only do we need to talk about the language, but we also need to talk about like, okay, well, do these things even make sense, right? So like, you know, being in the industry and being, you know, someone who does grants and works both in the digital, you know, equity space and the infrastructure space, right? The infrastructure space is kind of easier because a lot of the people you talk to in the infrastructure space are people in the industry, right?
Right.
Like, because you can just say, like, that's easy because when someone's like, well, what are you doing? You're like, I'm putting a wire on a pole and you're going to get internet. That's all they want to hear. And that's enough, right? Like, that's easy to break that down. But when we're talking about the DE space, especially the digital equity space, right? You run into this thing of like we like to say things like, oh, well, these are going to be digital navigators. Well, no one knows what that is, right? Like if you walk into a library and you're like, I got you a digital navigator, the person will be like, I don't know.
They'll
what
say,
you're
where's
using.
Carmen San Diego?
Like, what are we doing? Like, so get me where is it a GPS unit, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I think so, you know, because there wasn't as much attention on this kind of part of the ecosystem, you know, we really do need to sit down and have a conversation about like, well, what are the terms that might make sense? Like, what should we call things? What would be things that would demystify very quickly what we're trying to accomplish? Because we are trying to get out to a larger group of people, and not everyone's going to know what a digital. And I'm not picking on digital navigators; they do a great job. I'm not trying to say that. I'm just saying, like what are some things that maybe we should rename some stuff? And we actually are dedicating some resources with our RDIAs, our Regional Digital Inclusion Alliances. We are dedicating some resources to really think through with them and stakeholders to be like, what do you want us to call this stuff? Because if it's not going to have any impact, like if someone's like, why would I don't need a digital navigator, I need a digital skills coordinator. I'm like, yes, they're the same thing. Like, please show up to the library and go and learn how to use your iPad. Like, that's the whole point, right? Like, and so I think that's the, you know, like we do need to sit down and collectively have a conversation about like what will make it easier to understand if someone's never done it before.
So, you know, along those lines, right? Like I joked about you know, calling our agency OBI, and we seriously do that because we are sensitive, you know, to the fact that we need to be everywhere in New Mexico. But you know, along those lines, like you talk about digital opportunity, right? And we're calling it digital equity, but these are the same programs.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the Digital Equity Act, and in, you know, a lot of states they don't want like the word equity, so it's now opportunity. And so, you know, how do we find the common language? You know, because these are really bipartisan issues. Like, you know, Americans just want the internet.
Yeah.
Right? Like that is the standard, you know, and they want to be able to use it. And so, yeah, I think you're right. The language is a barrier, and there does need to be a conversation about how do we just level set and make sure that we're all talking the same thing. Regardless if it's in, you know, Dene or Spanish or English,
right?
But we have the same kind of common thread that we can talk about.
And I think too, you know, like no one is walking around, you know, the person who got a tablet, you know, for Christmas so that she could FaceTime her grandkids, you know, the person who has a phone for the first time, right? The person who, you know, is an immigrant who is online for the first time, the person who may have been incarcerated who is now, you know, a returning citizen, right? Like they all have different needs, and you know, they aren't walking into that library or that place going like, well, I'm here because I need a digital navigator, right? That's not what they're saying. They're walking because they're like,
they were problems.
I don't know how to use this, right? I've never used this. I don't know how to use this. And it's bad on us if we can't give them assurances like, hey, if you walk in the door, you're going to learn how to use it, right? Because at the end of the day, like you were saying before, right? They don't care about what I call it. They care that they get the internet. And similarly, when we're talking about this, they don't care what we call it, but they want to know that when they walk in, that someone's going to be able to sit them down and go like, hey, this is how you get online. Like this is, you know, an Apple ID is your email address. And some people are like, well, what's an email address? And you have to walk them through everything, right? And that they want to know that when they walk in and sit down, that person is going to be empathetic, is not going to be mean, and it's going to be like, yes, I get it. Like this is technology. Let me walk you through it, because that's what they want. They want to talk to their grandkids. They want to use the phone for the first time. They don't want a digital navigator. They want the result. And so that's why we have to start talking about like, well, then what's the easiest way? Again, that's why I joke about how bad we are naming things, but that's because they are named what they are. Yeah. Because we're trying to let people know this is what you're going to get when you walk in the door.
Awesome. Well, guys, I think you should go on tour together and just. I think you would be I think you would definitely get the word out about in a number of topics with acronyms would be fun. So thank you again. You guys really do true hero work in both states. I think they're very lucky to have you, and thank you so much for just teaching us and in giving us some insights of what goes on. So thank you again. You can catch
Sure.
us on YouTube, Spotify, and we look forward to our next episode of Broadband Heroes.
Yeah, well,
Take care.
thanks.
Take care.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.